point of privilege. Quick point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Guys, first of all, James Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. I just want to say, can we please keep the chatter to a minimum? I'm one of the people who's very, very prone to sensory overload. There's a lot of whispering and chatter going on. It's making it very difficult for me to focus. Please, can we just, I know we're all fresh and ready to go, but can we please just keep the chatter to a minimum? It's affecting my ability to focus. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. Okay, is there a speaker against name, chapter, pronouns?
Point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Please do not use gendered language to address everyone.
Okay.
Very brief point of information. If you are using a microphone, talk into it directly like I am right now, and do not wave your face back and forth because people cannot hear you. That is all.
Okay, awesome.
Hi, James Jackson, Sacramento DSA, he, him. I have already asked people to be mindful of the chatter of their comrades who are sensitive to sensory overload, and that goes double for the heckling and the hissing. It is also triggering to my anxiety. Like, the be comradely isn't just for, like, let's keep things civil or whatever. It's so that people aren't going to get triggered and so that it doesn't affect their performance as a delegate.
When we're raising our placards, when we transition between the votes, can we slow down a little bit? Because it's starting to get confusing for people. Thank
Totally.
you.
This is Daniel Ray from Piedmont. He, him pronouns.
So we are a bit behind schedule.
One thing that conservatives often fret about is the possibility of a communist uprising. It's something that always seems to be in the making because of the way our governments and institutions are behaving and all of the censorship that's going on. But is it really going to happen? Are we genuinely going to see a communist takeover? I don't think so. Why? Simply because I don't think they'll be able to organize themselves. They'll be too busy squabbling because communists love to squabble over everything. I mean, if you just think about the main aim of communism, to equalize everything, it's not possible, is it? We cannot possibly all be equal because that's not how nature works. There will always be people who are advantaged and others who are disadvantaged because we're not created equally. We can pretend that we are, but in reality, if you want to equalize everything in society, there are far too many adjustments to make and it's impossible to achieve. So that, to me, is what makes this meeting of communists at a socialist convention so hilarious, because they're so intent on equalizing everything and it's just not possible. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's watch this video together and talk it through.
Point of privilege. Quick point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Guys, first of all, James Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. I just want to say, can we please keep the chatter to a minimum? I'm one of the people who's very, very prone to sensory overload. There's a lot of whispering and chatter going on. It's making it very difficult for me to focus. Please, can we just, I know we're all fresh and ready to go, but can we please just keep the chatter to a minimum? It's affecting my ability to focus. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade.
Remember that song from Chris de Burgh in the 80s called Lady in Red? Well, this lady in red, who is actually a gentleman in red because he has he, him pronouns, he's complaining about sensory overload. Sensory overload. Hold on a minute there. Imagine if I was sat in the row behind him and I just had to witness him standing up there, squeezed into all that red spandex. Talk about sensory overload. That would be an injury to my sensibilities. Imagine like if I was an asexual, because that's the A in LGBTQIA+, isn't it? A stands for asexual. So I'm sitting there looking at all that junk squeezed into that red spandex, and that's giving me stirrings. I'm asexual. I do not do those stirrings because my gender identity as an asexual prohibits me from having those kind of stirrings that he's eliciting in that red spandex. So I'm feeling sensory overload right now. And while we're on the subject of asexuals, why is that even in the LGBT alphabet in the first place? Because being gay or lesbian or bisexual is all about sexuality and sexual attraction, right? That's the only difference between a lesbian, gay or bisexual person and anybody else. It's their sexual desires, right? Like if you were to walk into any gay club, you would see men in very skimpy outfits, writhing around, throwing it back. So we're talking about people who are ultrasexual, because we all know how the gay scene is, right? And the label gay or lesbian or bisexual is defined by your sexual activity. So why are people who are asexual, who do not engage in sexual activity, lumped into the same group as L, Gs and Bs? What do we have in common? It doesn't make sense, does it?
Okay, is there a speaker against name, chapter, pronouns?
Point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Please do not use gendered language to address everyone.
Okay.
So this person raises his hand and goes, point of personal privilege. Please do not use gendered pronouns. So that implies that everybody who is cisgendered, the term that refers to people who identify as the gender that they were born as. So if you're born male and you identify as male, or if you're born female and you identify as female, you are cisgendered. And the implication there is that if it's a point of privilege to use gendered pronouns, then everybody who is cisgender, everybody who identifies as their birth gender is privileged. And in order to counteract that privilege, we must not use gendered pronouns. So 99% of the population is privileged, because that is the true statistic. 99% of the population is cisgendered and less than 1% of the population is transgendered. So the 99% are all privileged, and they must make adjustments for the less than 1%. The definition of privilege is when a specific group in society has advantages that nobody else has. But when 99% of the population is in that group, then it's not a privilege. It's just the normal state of being. The fact that 1% doesn't hold that advantage just means that they are disadvantaged. It doesn't mean that everybody else is privileged. And can you imagine how hard it would be to speak without using any gendered language? You'd have to think so carefully about every sentence that you utter. And surely, if we're not to use gendered language, then it doesn't make sense for people to have to introduce themselves as he, him, or she, her, because that is gendered language, right? Surely, in order to not use gendered language, we'd have to assume that everybody is they, them, and treat everybody as non-gendered. And what about when you're talking about stuff like history? That's gendered, isn't it? You can't say history, because it's not his story. And you can't say her story either, because it's not her story. What do you call it? Their story? Should we change history to their story? But this reminds me of when I was working in the media industry, and one of the biggest corporations in the industry, around 2013, 2014, I think it was, they made all their staff put their gender pronouns in their social media bios, their personal social media bios. And I noticed that they were pretty much all he, him, or she, her. I didn't see a single they, them. So they got everybody to specify in their bios that they were he, him if they were men, and she, her if they were women. And this was to make the less than 1% transgender community feel included. And I just thought to myself, why does everybody have to publicly state the obvious that we already know, instead of simply asking the people who do not identify as they appear to state their pronouns? Because surely they're the only ones who have a valid reason to state their pronouns, to tell you what gender they are, if it's not clear from looking at them, right?
Very brief point of information. If you are using a microphone, talk into it directly like I am right now.
So note how this delegate opens with point of information, while the previous one started with point of privilege. So does that mean that everybody who makes a point has to first declare what kind of a point it is? I think so, right? So before you make a point, before you say something, you have to categorize what you're about to say. Every thought needs categorizing. That is very communist, because communists have always believed in categorizing everything and labeling everything. I mean, that's one of the things we've all observed in recent years with the left, their obsession with labeling every group and subgroup in society and assigning to them certain specified characteristics and You must fit into your box. And that is something that's always been central to communism. If you think back to the Soviet Union, the government employed so many people to categorize and label and count everything. Because in order to achieve their goal of egalitarianism, everything had to be accounted for. So it all needed to be counted. In order to fairly ration everything across society, we had to know how many people there were and what was their allocation for each item. So if each person had an allocation of 3 toothbrushes per year, the government had to count all the toothbrushes that people were consuming, and the toothbrush factories had to count all the toothbrushes they were manufacturing, and they had to be distributed in accordance with the correct allocation. And that's just toothbrushes. So imagine you had to do this with pencils and pens and books and shoes and socks. They ended up basically employing huge numbers of people just to count things and achieve nothing else other than a figure. So yeah, that's why this obsession with categorizing and labeling everything reeks of communism and really inhibits any sort of productivity, like in this meeting.
Very brief point of information. If you are using a microphone, talk into it directly like I am right now, and do not wave your face back and forth because people cannot hear you. That is all.
Okay, awesome.
Did you hear that? The attitude with which he told her not to wave her face back and forth? Would you not be so offended and triggered by that if you were her? He's implying that she's talking like this. But she obviously wasn't. That turn of phrase, waving her face back and forth, was a little dramatic, and I think she should be deeply offended by that. I mean, that statement clearly comes from a place of privilege. That surely is something that will only be uttered by somebody who has perfect comportment, who can maintain a statuesque level of composure. How does he know that she doesn't have cerebral palsy? Such an ableist attitude.
Hi, James Jackson, Sacramento DSA, he, him. I have already asked people to be mindful of the chatter of their comrades who are sensitive to sensory overload, and that goes double for the heckling and the hissing. It is also triggering to my anxiety. Like, the be comradely isn't just for, like, let's keep things civil or whatever. It's so that people aren't gonna get triggered and so that it doesn't affect their performance as a delegate.
This guy has the nerve to stand up and say that he's triggered because he suffers from anxiety, while raising his voice and causing untold anxiety across the entire audience. I mean, what would you expect to be the outcome of yelling at people other than to cause anxiety? How little self-awareness he must have. I'm so triggered by his behavior.
When we're raising our placards, when we transition between the votes, can we slow down a little bit because it's starting to get confusing for people? Thank you.
Excuse me? Slow down? That is so insensitive. Okay, you might want it slowed down, but what about me? I have ADHD. I need it sped up. If it goes any slower, I'm gonna fall asleep or I'm gonna act up because I need it fast. My ADHD requires constant stimulation. If this thing goes any slower, I'm gonna freak out, I'm gonna spaz.
This is Daniel Ray from Piedmont, he, him pronouns.
So we are a bit behind schedule.
So yeah, I have a feeling that this meeting perhaps never got off the ground. Maybe this was the first meeting of the group, so they had to spend the entire meeting assessing what adjustments needed to be made and then make those adjustments for the second meeting. But if there was a different group of attendees at the next meeting who had different requirements that required different adjustments, then they'd have to assess all of those and make those adjustments too. So basically, I don't think we need to worry too much about a communist uprising. They may certainly try to uprise, as they are doing right now, but I don't think they'll ever be able to organize it. They won't be able to get it off the ground. That's my view. What do you think? Please leave me your comments. And if you enjoyed this video, do give it a like. Oh, and just before I finish, I want to show you my t-shirt because it's relevant to what we're talking about today. It says POR, Person of Retardation. I designed this logo because everyone at school used to tell me how retarded I was, and so I am somebody who needs adjustments for my retardation. But You're not allowed to say it anymore, are you? You're not allowed to call people the R word. It's ableist, right? So just as we're not allowed to say colored person, because that's now racist, according to the woke left, it's not colored person, it's person of color. That's not racist. Yeah, when you replace adjective noun, colored person, with noun, preposition noun, person of color, it's no longer racist or ableist or any other kind of ist. So next time you want to call somebody the R word, don't. You have to call them a person of retardation. So if you too are a person of retardation like me and you want to cop one of these, I've designed them in tees, sweats and hoodies in a whole load of different colors and mugs as well. And you can get yourself one in my merch store by hitting the link in my bio. My store is called Donnie Wong's. That's me, Donnie Wong. So if you want to support my work, do check out my little shop of goodies. And if you enjoyed this video, do give it a like and please subscribe to my channel if you're not already doing so. Thank you.